Hi everyone, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to draw dog paws in pastels. Now when drawing hands or feet of any animal or person, it can be very easy to get a little lost with what it is that we're drawing. Now what happens is if we don't correct that or work in a way that prevents that from happening at all, is the foot or the fingers end up taking on a very odd shape. So what we want to be doing here is just focusing on the main lights and darks. Now to start with, don't focus on drawing feet or hands at all. You just want to be mapping in your main shapes that you see in your reference photo. Now I am switching between my various colours, so again I can hint at where any of those markings are and those main dark patches. This is going to help for me to look at my reference photo, back at my drawing and know exactly where I should be. Now this little focus study was actually requested by a couple of members on Patreon, so I wanted to be able to show exactly how to break this up into a really manageable process that's prevented it from becoming overwhelming. Now this is one of those times where each toe could potentially get lost from one to the other. The toes end up taking on much more of a larger shape and they just don't end up looking as realistic as they should. So what I want to be focusing on here is each small section at a time. And I like to get that at this stage now about probably 60-70% done. I haven't added any details yet, but I am hinting at the main colours and the lights and the darks. Now what I start off with is mapping in the claws first because that gives me something that I can clearly identify in my reference photo. Once I've done that, I can then work on the area around it. Now the one thing you'll notice here is the paws of this portrait are actually quite small in relation to the size of the pencils. So what this means is I can't add every single detail that I can see in the reference photo. I need to just pick a few. Now this portrait of the entire dog was 8 by 10 inches. So that does mean that the feet are going to be one of the smallest elements. But I can still get that level of realism by making sure that I am pointing out the main lights and darks. If I'm making sure that they are visible in my drawing, this will take on that depth and three-dimensional shape. Now if I didn't get my darks as dark and I didn't get my highlights bright, this foot would look flat and two-dimensional. So I want to be making sure that I am focusing on my contrast from start to finish. Now as I'm building up my layers here gradually, this is where the contrast is always reinforced. You'll see that I keep going back with my darker colours and then I'll come in and add some of my midtones. And then I'll finish off with my highlights. I usually do typically work from dark to light with pastels. We have that wonderful flexibility with this medium to do so, and it really does help to build up more depth. Now there are exceptions, there are no rules in art. There will be potentially some lighter fur colours where I will work more of a cautious approach and I'll have more of a lighter layer down first. But for something like this, the techniques using dark to light work really well. Now throughout all of this, you'll see that I've worked on really small sections, sometimes squares of about 1 centimetre each. I don't focus on the entire foot in one go. I do think that's where we can go wrong very quickly early on if we start blocking in the entire layer and then working on the next layer for the whole foot and so on. Whereas here I'm just focusing on one small section at a time. And when you've got something where there is a lot going on, you know, these 4 individual toes, it's really important to make sure that they're all in the right place. So if you do find yourself feeling overwhelmed and you're maybe staring at your reference photo more than you're working on your drawing, that's usually an indication that you're focusing on too much of a larger area. So by working on smaller sections, we usually progress through that drawing a bit quicker and more efficiently. Now here at this stage, I'm coming in with some of my lighter colours, and again, it's really important that I don't add every single hair. If I do that here, given as I've said the size of the paw, I'm not going to be able to have any of those layers underneath show through. Those highlights before I know it will end up covering the foot completely. So I do need to be making sure that I am being a little bit more precise with those details, but only picking a few. Now one big tip that I find can be very useful is sometimes through stages when working on dog paws like this, is you can actually start to doubt yourself whether or not what you've done so far is right, but you're not quite sure what it is. So if there's something in the first or second toe that you've been drawing that you're not quite sure about, but you just don't want to be making any changes yet because you're not sure what it should be, then I would recommend to work on the toes next to it and then usually that actually either resolves the problem or highlights what should be fixed. The reason being, usually 1 or 2 toes on its own are going to look very odd. Once you've got more of the foot drawn in to this sort of standard here, it's then easier to really pinpoint and isolate anything that does need to be tweaked. When we've only got 1 or 2 toes in the drawing, they're almost like they're floating, they're not attached to anything. So unless something is obviously jumping out to you that you do need to change, then of course go ahead and make those alterations. But if you're genuinely not quite sure what it is that's not right, it may just be that you don't have enough of the foot drawn in yet, and it's just the way that your brain is processing it. Now onto the second paw here. The process is the same. I'm really just focusing on the shapes, the colours, the lights and the darks. The one difference with this foot, because of the light source, is the colours on the orange sections of fur are much more vibrant. So I want to be making sure that I've got my brighter colours in here and I've really captured that lovely colour saturation. Now something else that's important is both of these paws, they look very different because of the angle of both of the feet, the way that they are resting on the cushion that the dog is sat on. So I don't want to be making sure that every toe looks the same or symmetrical as the other foot, because that is going to end up making this foot here look very odd. So we want to be focusing on that reference photo for each paw individually. Even if the dog or cat is led completely face onto the camera, there is still going to be light and dark variations depending on that light source. So it's really important to study that photo closely. Now the other thing that I'm really focusing on here is my softness on my base layer. This is something that I talk about in all of my videos, both here on YouTube and in depth on Patreon. So I like to make sure that my base layer is well blended and I don't have any harsh start and stop points. Now although I've got my harsh edges where my black sections of the toe is on this side, you'll see now that as I come in with my oranges and my browns, I'm slowly smoothing that out. I don't want there to be those harsh edges because I just feel that makes the details also look harsh and rigid. Now that ends up making the foot look rather square, so I want to be making sure that the shading at this base layer stage is worked on. Now I also find that the details I start to apply on top naturally look a little bit more softer if the base layer underneath is more blended. So as I continue to map in more of the toes here, something that I mention in the real-time tutorials is never rush the last section. So I've only got a few toes left here and the sections become more narrower and smaller because of the angle of the photograph. If I rush these areas, it's going to bring down the entire portrait when it's finished. So I really want to be making sure here that every toe is given the right amount of time. Now this foot didn't take me as long to complete because it is smaller, as I said, due to the angle of the photo. But I didn't have to rush any layer, it just took a little bit less time, but I've still got it to the same standard. Now the way that we use the pencils is really important with pastels. It helps to determine how we create those details, the way that the pastel is applied through various stages. That's also what helps to get those details looking nice and smooth. I personally don't like the look where the pastel pencil details have a graininess to it. That's something that I really want to work on and avoid in my artwork. And this is one specific section of my real-time tutorials on Patreon that I focus on. The layering process makes a huge difference to that. Now on my Patreon channel, I really do focus on the pet portrait side of things as well as wildlife subjects. So I've got a wide variety of dog, cat and horse tutorials so that Patreon members who may like to take on pet portrait commissions of their own have a wide range of different animals there that they can then use the tips and techniques I show into their own work. Now if you've got any questions about Patreon, then feel free to pop them in the comments below because I am more than happy to help. The wonderful thing with Patreon is it's really flexible, so you can stay for as long as you want or you can cancel at any time. So I really do hope that this video has been useful. If it was, I would really appreciate it if you could give it a like and a thumbs up because it makes a huge difference to my channel. I also upload a couple of videos here to YouTube every week, so if you would like to get notified of that content, then don't forget to hit the subscribe and the bell button. Now this will likely be my last video for YouTube for 2023, so I really just want to take the opportunity to say a massive thank you for all of the support that you guys have given me. It is amazing. I am so grateful. I wouldn't be able to create the tutorials without it. If you've got any art related questions, I am more than happy to help anytime, so pop them in the comments below. And I've got lots of exciting tutorials planned for 2024, but as always, thank you so much for watching, really appreciated.